Now, when we're suffering with a problem or struggling with a problem, one of the things that we're often tempted to do is to dig into the problem. And that can be useful if done strategically and done with a real purpose, to kind of hold the problem up and have a little look at it and see where it might be coming from and all of that kind of stuff. But it's not the only way to go with things. And one way of overcoming a problem is to almost kind of put the problem down and get curious about what the solution, well, not what the solution is, but what the solution would look like if it happened. And so whenever we're faced with a struggle or something to overcome or something that keeps getting in our way, one thing that we can actually do is start imagining forward. Let's suppose that we overcame this problem. We don't have to worry how at this point. We don't have to find what it is that's going to get us to that point. But let's just suppose that we do. We find the solution. It's done. Let's just imagine that the problem no longer exists for us. And instead, we end up with the life that we want, where the problem is not present. What would that actually look like? If we were to wake up suddenly and realise that the problem was there, what would we notice about ourselves? How would our day be different tomorrow if the problem wasn't there? What would we notice ourselves doing? What would be different in our body? What would be different in our minds? What would we be thinking instead of the thoughts we have when we have the problem? And what would other people be noticing about us too? Because that can provide a good clue in terms of what things would look like when the problem's gone, because other people would surely notice things about us that would give them a clue that the problem was no longer touching our lives in the way that it has been. So friends and family members, even pets, what would the pet dog notice? What would the pet cat, what would the goldfish notice about us that is different now that the problem is gone? And when we kind of ask a question like that, what will life actually look like when the problem's gone? What would you be doing? What would you notice yourself doing? What would you notice yourself thinking and feeling? And what would other people see about you that would tell them that the problem was gone? What it actually builds is this rich tapestry of what life looks like without the problem. What your solution looks like really, and how life would be if you had it. And the interesting thing is that even though we have this rich tapestry now of what we'd be doing and how we'd be feeling and what other people would be noticing about us, and we have this rich vision of the life that we want and the life that we would be living if the problem was no longer here. The interesting thing is we've built this rich tapestry quite easily without even having to think about what we actually do to get that point. And the reason that's interesting is because sometimes thinking, how do I do that, can be quite a limiter. But painting this picture in rich detail, we'll now realise that as we look at that picture of our life without the problem, some of it actually already exists. And it might only be now and then, but some of it will actually exist already. So if somebody says, well, without the problem, I think we'd all be sat round the table as a family, having a conversation while we have our evening meal. And it might actually occur to that person that actually, they did do that once last month. It was really nice, like they thought. And they'd like to do more of that. And the powerful thing then is, once you realise that you did do that once last month, you can think, well, how did I do that? Because if you've already done it, then clearly you've got the capability of bringing that solution, putting life into that solution at some point, even to some extent. And so you can start to question how you did it, rather than thinking, well, how can I make a change? By starting, almost like by putting the cart before the horse and saying, well, what will the change look like? You'll realise that the change actually does exist in some form or other, a lot of the time. And so once you realise that, for instance, you did sit round as a family, just like you want to. I mean, you only did the once, but you did do it last month. How did you do that? Because once you know how you did that, then you can do that again, and then the change starts to happen. And the other interesting thing about looking forward rather than looking back and building this rich tapestry is elements of it seem very, very achievable. If part of your life is without the problem, you'd be getting up at 8 o'clock, you'd be setting the alarm and you'd actually get straight out of bed. Well, suddenly that seems like it is something that you could do. You could set the alarm for 8 o'clock and get up out of bed. It might be difficult, but you feel as though you could do that. And so what it allows is for change to be a bit more granular, a little bit more achievable. And in those moments where the change has already happened, because change is like that, it allows you to dig into how you did it in the first place so that you can actually do more of it. And so I share this with you because there are actually two ways to focus on a problem. One is to kind of look back to see where it's come from and see if that can be altered, to see how the problem is being manifested in the present, to see whether the kind of source of that can be changed. That's the common way we look at problems. But we can actually look forward too, and that's the thing that we often miss. We can actually say, well, what does the solution look like? If I already had the solution, how would I know? What would I be doing in my life? What would other people see in me? What would have changed in me if all of a sudden the solution was present and the problem was gone? And because that's a really missed approach in terms of solving problems, I wanted to spend this episode just going into some detail about how that works, and just to flag up that it is an alternative way to overcome the thing that you might be struggling with. And so if this has proven useful, then feel free to share it with your friends and whoever you think would find it useful. You can subscribe for free to this podcast wherever you get them. You can go to psychotherapy.com in order to watch them as videos on YouTube. And if you want to explore this idea with me directly and work with me directly, I'm Alun Parry. I'm at the Liverpool Psychotherapy practice, and that's liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.